Hello students, Mr. Young here with Chapter 26, Lesson 2, Part 2. This whole lesson was on Africa and the Middle East. We hit Africa in the last part, Part 2 today. We're talking all about the Middle East. So, we've had a lot of very recent history occurring in the Middle East. There's a lot of things going on there for a while. You had the whole invasion of Afghanistan after the 9/11 and all that stuff. So the Middle East is still something very prevalent in the news, and today we're going to kind of take a look back and see how some of these things came to be. A great deal of it has to do with Israel and oil. Let's take a look. Okay, so during and after World War II, the Middle East was winning independence from European control. It was part of that whole imperialism thing, and now World War II happens, and the nations of the world start to become free, just like Africa did. Same things happen in the Middle East. The region was particularly important because it was, number one, the crossroads for a lot of world trade, as well as the supplier of the hot commodity known as petroleum, or oil. Nations like Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and Syria were being created, and one non-Arab state was born in 1948, which is Israel. Now, after World War II, the nations of the UN decided to give the Jewish people a homeland. They divided British Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab countries. The Jews in general were pretty pleased with this. However, the Palestinians and Arabs in general were super ticked off. The area was a traditional homeland of the Jewish people, but they hadn't been around for some time, and one can say with certainty that the Jews and the Arabs, ethnic groups, don't particularly get along. When the British left the area in 1948, I believe the day Israel became a country, they were attacked by multiple Arab nations. Israel was able to defend itself, winning that first war, what you might call the first Arab-Israeli war. And there was an exodus of basically Arabs, Muslims, living in and around the Israeli state. So they weren't going anywhere. Israel was going to stick around. At first, after that first war didn't work out for sort of this League of Arab Nations, they put their hopes in Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser wanted a strong, modern Egypt, with reduced influence from European powers within the Middle East. In 1956, Egypt seized the Suez Canal from foreign owners. The two biggest, well, here's what happens. France and Britain are like, no way, Jose. With a little bit of help from Israel, they go to invade Egypt and basically dethrone President Nasser. But here's the problem. USA and the Soviet Union, the two biggest powers in the world, did not support this invasion, and so this invasion ended it. After this, that president of Egypt, Nasser, retained control of the Suez Canal and started to receive aid from the Soviet Union. He basically walked out of that conflict a rising power. He basically saved because France and Egypt and Israel were going to kick his butt. More conflict. Tensions between Israel and their neighbors remained high. In 1967, you ended up with what is commonly referred to as the Six-Day War, or the Third Arab-Israeli War. And here's the breakdown. Egypt starts massing troops on the Egyptian-Israeli border, as well as putting in place a naval blockade. Israel sees this and launches what some consider a controversial preemptive strike to basically destroy the Egyptian Air Force. So the Israelis launch all but 12 of their planes and destroy the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. So now Israel has air superiority in the coming ground war, and they end up defeating Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, who had all attacked Israel. In effect, they took a bunch of land from all three countries. You can see that they were able to take the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, the Golan Heights from Syria, and the West Bank from Jordan. So Israel basically kicked butt in this one with their preemptive strike. Problems, of course, did not end there. The 1960s saw the rise of the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat. Members of the PLO engaged in terrorist activities against Israel with the ultimate goal of destroying the nation to create a new Palestine, essentially. Here's Yasser Arafat. The Palestinian people have no national identity. I, Yasser Arafat, man of destiny, will give them that identity through conflict with Israel. Many consider him just to be a terrorist. Now, in 1973, war broke out again. Both Egypt and Syria launched coordinated attacks in an attempt to regain the land they had lost in the Six-Day War. They made the surprise attack on Yom Kippur, the holiest of Jewish holidays. That's why they call this one the Yom Kippur War. Each side met with initial success, but once Israel was able to mobilize its army, they drove both Egypt and Syria back. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, counterattacked, driving deep into Syria. I read that they were within artillery range of Damascus, and they also drove towards the Egyptian city of Suez. So they go back through the Sinai Peninsula, head towards Suez, and I mean they made it pretty far into Egypt. They made it to the city of Suez, and the IDF had surrounded an entire Egyptian army group. And at this point, sort of the rest of the world was like, okay, you can stop now. You win. Because the IDF was about to slaughter that Egyptian army. The war ended, and relations between Egypt and Israel began to normalize when Israel gave the Sinai Peninsula back to Egypt. Alright, to OPEC. Oh, OPEC. Not very many people like you. OPEC stands for the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC was created in the 60s by all the major oil exporting countries. You can see them all here. And they controlled how much oil that their countries, the member nations produced in order to control the supply and therefore price of oil. And that's why people don't like them. They accuse OPEC of gouging oil prices or making them go higher than they need to be. During the Yom Kippur War, the Arab nations of OPEC refused to sell oil to any nation supporting Israel, causing quite the energy crisis. If you've asked your grandparents or parents, they will say, if they were around back then, they remember massive lines at the gas station, and you were only allowed to get gas on certain days and stuff like that. Back in the 90s, my parents complained about OPEC every time the price of gas went up. They said, darn, OPEC is gouging prices again. In general, it makes people salty when you talk about them. Alright, unresolved conflicts. In the 80s, Palestinians carried out intifada, or uprisings, in Israel. Mostly live terrorist attacks. At peace talks in the 90s, the Palestinians basically agreed to recognize the right of Israel to exist, and in exchange they were given control of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. They're not really their own nations, but they were given sort of self-rule within Israel. Terrorism continued anyways. Israel started walling off these sort of Palestinian areas to keep the terrorists out, and then peace talks go on, and then they fail, and it's pretty much still this way today. Hamas is now the political party in charge of the Palestinian legislature, and they are quite militant. Some consider them just a terrorist organization. Other than Israel, you have other things going on in the Middle East. You have a lot of problems in the Middle East because the oil is spread out, making some countries very wealthy and some very poor. You have rapid population growth with limited resources for the people. Many people in these times of strife have turned to traditional Muslim values. Now, Iran specifically. After World War II, world relations with Iran were pretty good. The Shah, or king, was a solid ally to the United States. However, he was not very popular with his own people, and those people turned to their religious leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Khomeini led the people to protest and created the Islamic Republic in 1979, when the Shah and his family were forced to leave the country, sort of like a theocracy. Protests for more freedom in Iran in the 90s and 2000s basically failed, and the Islamic Republic maintains its power. Since the rise of the Islamic Republic, since the fall of the Shah, world relations with Iran in general have been strained. No one wants Iran to have nuclear weapons, which they say they're not developing. They say they're developing nuclear power plants, but no one really believes them. They're trying to build nuclear missiles. Alright, the Arab Spring, which your book does not mention by name, which is kind of funny, is a series of protests and revolutions in the Middle East spanning many countries that can be characterized in general as young people wanting reform or to topple their authoritarian regimes. It was successful in some countries with, some tyrants were removed, and some of the more stable Arabic kingdoms reformed further at the demand of the people. Some problems that caused the protests by these young people, you had things like poverty, joblessness, extreme poor-rich divide, oppression, things like that, human rights violations. So they wanted change. In some cases they got it, some they didn't. One lasting effect would be the Syrian Civil War. Rebels did not overthrow Bashar al-Assad, and that's actually what our last writing exercise was about. So it was all part of the Arab Spring. Talking Arab Spring, you're talking time period of like 2011 through 2012, that kind of thing. So that's your Middle East in a nutshell. Lots of war, lots of instability. You have a quick quiz on the next page. It's only 5 points. It's 2 multiple choice questions and a true-false. And all the information you need to succeed on that, I pretty much just went over. Alright, that's it for today. There's a lot in this lesson that I elaborate on more than the book. So if you look at the book, you're going to go, they never mentioned the Yom Kippur War, at least by name, or Arab Spring. It was important to me that you get a little more details and not this totally glossed over version. Alright, hey, if you need me, I'm here. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.